Good evening, everybody. I think the numbers have stabilized, so I'm going to take that to mean that there may be one or two people just trickling in due course, but that's fine. So my name is Andrew Thin. I'm chairman of the Land Commission, and a huge welcome to this. We run these, right since the beginning, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, we've run public meetings every month somewhere in Scotland. During the pandemic, we started doing them online. We found actually that people like them online, so we're still doing them online. And I'll say a wee bit more about the format and all the rest of it in a minute, but I think first of all, it would be useful to just introduce who's here from the Land Commission. So I'm here, obviously, I'm chairman of the Land Commission. I'm also on the board of the Crofting Commission, if you want to talk about crofting. And if you get really bored, I also work for the Prisons Inspectorate, so we can talk about that as well. But also with me, and probably far more useful to you, is Lauren McLeod. So Lauren, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks for that. Good evening, everybody. My name's Lauren McLeod. I'm one of the Land Commissioners, and I'm based in sunny Oban this evening. I've been involved in various land reform initiatives over the last 30 years or so, and prior to becoming a commissioner, I was chair of Community Land Scotland, which is the representative body for community landowners in Scotland. So really pleased to be with you this evening and looking forward to the question and answer session and discussion later on. Thanks, Andrew.
Lauren, thanks very much indeed. And Karen is also with us. Karen Grant, do you want to introduce yourself, Karen?
Hello, I'm Karen Grant, and I'm a good practice advisor at the Scottish Land Commission. So a lot of my work at the Commission is involved with working across sectors with landowners and land managers and communities to better understand and align with the land rights and responsibilities set out in the Scottish Government's Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement. So I have a mixed background working with environmental organisations, but I'm also a farmer on a mixed arable and livestock farm up in Murray. So I've got a wide interest in land issues.
Thanks, Karen. And you're the only one of us who's put up the slick background with the Land Commission logo on. So well done. I'm afraid the rest of it, you're getting an insight into somebody's living room. And the fourth person who you can see from us is Nikki. Nikki, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Yes, hi everyone. I'm Nikki and I am Head of Communications and Corporate Services at the Land Commission. Started in the new year. Newcomer to the field of land. My background is actually in NHS, but I've found it absolutely fascinating since I've been with the Land Commission, and really interested to hearing your thoughts and views tonight.
Nikki, thanks very much indeed. And the person you can't see, but actually probably the most important person here this evening, is Jess. Jess, as well as being brilliant at the IT stuff, will be right throughout the discussion, will be putting up in the chat box useful links should you wish to sort of follow things up in more depth, so you can pick those links up. But also she's recording this and will in due course put it up on a YouTube link, so that if you want to go back and look at some bit of it or whatever, you can. And so obviously all the links will be in there too. So Jess, you can't see, but she is absolutely superb at this sort of thing. Now, format first of all. So we're going to kick off in a second by asking you what you want, but immediately after that I'm going to do a wee presentation just to help. Not everyone on this meeting will know much about us or know much about land reform, so I'm going to do a wee presentation just to get us all onto the same playing field, so to speak. But then the purpose of these things, and we've done them since the beginning, is to make sure that the Land Commission's work is informed by the priorities of the Scottish people, and also to give the Scottish people an opportunity to challenge us. We're public servants. You ought to be able to challenge us if you wish. That's and hold us to account. That's absolutely right. Once we've done the wee presentation, there will be a discussion, and we'll continue till 8:30. I promise we'll finish by 8:30, so there'll be a wee bit of daylight left if you want to get out in the sun. And to make that work, you'll have two options. There's a wee button that says chat on it, and if you click on that, you can type into it your thoughts or your questions or whatever you want. And alternatively, if you don't want to do that, then there's another button which I'm actually just trying to find at the moment. Oh dear, I'm not very good at this, but anyway, there's a yes, if you go to the right hand side where it says more, there's a button that says raise hand. If you click on that, then a wee yellow hand will come up, and I'll know that you want to speak, and I'll invite you in, and you can give us your thoughts properly. But before we go into the presentation, I'm just going to pause just for a few minutes, really, because it is, it's really important to us that this works for you. We're here primarily to learn about priorities in the south of Scotland, but you're here for a reason too. So whatever that reason is, please tell us. It would really help. So I'm just going to pause for 2-3 minutes, but the chat button, of course, is there continuously. So throughout the presentation, if you feel like putting your thoughts in, please do. But just tell us, if you would, what it is you're looking for. It will help me to make sure that we do our best. I'm not perfect, but we'll do our best to satisfy what you want. So please just type that in. I'll just pause for 2-3 minutes, then I'm going to go on with the presentation. There's Karen putting something in. Thank you, Karen. That's a good start. And everyone's been floored by this idea of telling us what they want. Well, I'm going to leave you to think about that, and you can at any time type into the chat box what you want. What I want to do, if I can get the thing to work, is continue on. So 10 minutes, 15 minutes maybe on just to sort of set the scene. So what's land reform? I think everyone knows the Land Commission is here to advise on land reform, but what on earth is that? And most people know, because it's such a issue in Scotland, there has been for generations, that part of land reform is the real challenges that arise from the fact that Scotland has the most concentrated land ownership pattern in Europe, which means that power is highly concentrated in many parts of Scotland. And that's a long-standing issue. It goes back into the 19th century. The original Crofting Act, for example, of 1886, was deliberately designed to tackle that issue of concentrated power. And most people also know that land reform is something to do with the rights of crofters and the rights of tenant farmers. And the last Land Reform Act actually had a huge section in it, which was changing and strengthening actually the rights of tenant farmers. Probably fewer people recognise that increasingly today, land reform is actually about new things. It's about the use of land to sequester carbon. It's about the use of land to generate biodiversity credits, and huge amounts of money at them are pouring into land at the moment. Land values in some parts of Scotland have doubled and trebled in the last couple of years because of this huge influx of money, mostly from outside Scotland, seeking to exploit the returns that are anticipated from these things. It's not, by no means certain, frankly, that there will be these returns, but you're seeing vast amounts of money chasing it. It's also about, in contemporary times at any rate, about vacant and derelict land in a way that it never has been. And for many urban Scots, this is the most important land reform issue. The fact that so many people, for example, in Glasgow, live within a few hundred meters of a vacant and derelict site is pretty disgraceful, actually, by European standards. There are very few other cities in Europe that allow that to happen. And we've been tackling that for the last 3 or 4 years, and with significant success. That picture is actually what was a piece of vacant and derelict land used by drug addicts and all the rest of it. It's now a bike place for kids. Of course, lots of things changing in the countryside. So land reform is also about the way in which we control land use decision making. People know, for example, that local government has compulsory purchase powers. Probably what people don't know is that we've done a lot of work and made recommendations on compulsory sale powers. It's a completely new idea, wherein if we've suggested, for example, that if somebody was just leaving a piece of land vacant and derelict and not using it, and it was a blight on the town or whatever, the local authorities should have the right to require that to be sold on the open market to someone who will use it. The access rights, which were part of the early land reform in the Scottish, after the Scottish Parliament was created, that continues to change, of course. What is responsible access? That changes as new things come along. We didn't have paddle boards when that was passed, but nor did we have things like electric bikes and stuff, and that raises some quite interesting challenges, actually. Most people, I think, know that in the last 10 years, community ownership of land has been a tremendous success story, and there's a huge momentum there. Actually, what fewer people, I think, know is that community ownership is not just about land, it's rapidly spreading. There are community-owned cinemas, toilets, buildings, and there's even a community-owned bridge. This whole idea is spreading fast, and it's all part of land reform. A big priority for many, many Scots is just that they would like to be able to get a small bit of land. And that's not a new idea. Between the wars and again after the Second War, the hutting movement in Scotland enabled people to get small bits of land. That's actually my granny's hut, which was actually burnt down by the landlord, which was a very sad thing from my point of view. And is also, land reform is also about tax and financial support. A huge amount of public money, your taxes, is paid out in support to landowners for one thing or another. Equally, there are whole issues around what taxes landowners should pay or not. Some landowners, for example, regard investment in land as a way of sheltering money from tax. Other people are of the view that we should tax more heavily the value that is in land, and about half of the nation's wealth is in land. So we've produced recommendations on that, in which, among other things, we did actually say that we thought that there was scope to think much harder about taxing the wealth that's tied up in land. And land for housing is a huge issue in many places. It's amazing how I go around Scotland and people say to me, look, the big issue here is land for housing. Well, it's actually a big issue in an awful lot of Scotland. We've again done a lot of work on that, published some really quite bold recommendations based on experiences from other parts of Europe, where local government has a much stronger hand in determining what land is used for housing. In this country, there is a tendency, policy in effect, is driven by, so the landowner brings forward land for housing. So it's led by and large by the private sector. So the Scottish Land Commission was set up in 2017 by Parliament, by an Act of Parliament. Our job is to provide advice and recommendations. We're a Scottish organisation, a national organisation. We're a very small organisation. We've only got about a dozen or so staff, maybe slightly more. And our work is planned, because we can't do everything at once. Our work's planned into 3-year bites. And every 3 years, we agree a strategic plan with the Scottish Government, and it's published, it's laid before Parliament. And that's what we're going to do for the next 3 years. And we're just coming to the end of a 3-year plan. So this public meeting is particularly important, because the public meetings are one of the most important ways in which we figure out what the priorities are of the Scottish people that need to go into the next strategic plan. The first strategic plan, for example, was put in place after about 4 or 5 months, I think, of public meetings, and it was actually very difficult to figure out what the priorities should be, but we did it. It's worth just saying this, I think. Our work is based on a pretty fundamental concept, which was put in place by the Scottish Parliament in 2016 when it created us. And that is that with land rights go responsibilities. The two are inextricably linked. It's there, the wee photograph there is part 1 of the Land Reform Act 2016. And it states quite boldly, really, if you want to own land in Scotland, if you want to own land rights, then you take on responsibilities as well. You can't have one without the other. And it's a pretty profound and important concept. And it drives most of our work in one way or another. The current strategic plan, which we will be finishing off later this summer, has 3 parts to it. One is about land rights themselves and reforming and rebalancing those to reflect evolving circumstances. Another is about precisely what I've just said, the accountability of people who have land rights to also fulfill responsibilities. And the third one is actually land markets themselves and the way in which land markets do or don't work. And I'll say a bit more about that too. But let me just run you through a few, half a dozen maybe, just examples of what we've been up to over the last 3 years, because it'll give you a flavour of what we're doing. So a big priority for the last 3 years was helping to do the thinking ahead of a Land Reform Bill 2023, which the government intends to publish later this year. There's been a consultation as well. It was called Land Reform in a Net Zero Nation, and many of you may well have responded to that. I don't know, it was a Scottish Government consultation, but our job was to do the hard analysis, the hard thinking over the last 3 years that makes sure that this is a really good bill. The bill will focus on a manifesto commitment of the government to address the concentration of land ownership issue. It's a serious, serious issue. It's been there for a very long time. It won't be fixed overnight. It'll take a long time to fix it as well. But the bill will comprise a range of proposals to strengthen the emphasis on responsibilities and to bring in controls on power. And a lot of the work we've been doing has been analysing, so where does that power work against the interests of the Scottish people, and what do we need to do about it? And the third main plank of it, which again we recommended, is that where a big chunk of land is changing hands, and the question of what is big, well, we don't know yet. The government in the consultation said maybe 3,000 hectares. I don't know what they'll decide. But what we said was, if a big chunk of land is changing hands, and therefore potentially a localized monopoly over power over certain, power over a lot of issues, there should be a public interest test. And it might be that if it failed that public interest test, if it was too much power concentrated in one package, if you liked, that either they might be required to sell it in lots, to break it up, in other words, or perhaps to offer it to the local community, or there may be other things. We'll have to see what's in the bill, but it's been an important area of our work. Community ownership, community empowerment continues to be a really important area of work for us. It's been developing, I think. Lauren said he'd been involved in the last 30 years. I hadn't realized it was as long as that long, but you're right. It was actually about 94, I think, the first community purchase. Initially, it was done by crowdfunding. It wasn't called that in those days, but that's what it was. More recently, the Scottish Land Fund, which is lottery and publicly funded. Extraordinary success in the Western Isles. 75% of all land in the Western Isles is now community owned. That's a remarkable statistic in quite a short period of time. But in other parts of Scotland, much, much less, including in the south of Scotland, much, much less. It involves land, woodland, buildings, bridges, as I said earlier, public toilets, bridges, and cinemas, all sorts of things. There is this thing called the community right to buy. CRTB is the community right to buy in extreme circumstances, and there is legislation to support that. But it is important to say that under the European Convention on Human Rights, that owners of property rights do have quite strong legislative protection. So it's not a straightforward business. If a community decides it wants to acquire something, it can't just trundle along to the landowner and say, clear off, we're having it. That's not an option. It's quite tightly circumscribed, and that's not all. That has been contentious. And what we've been working on most recently, and I think quite excitingly, is models where actually you could have a shared ownership, shared governance model. So instead of just having one person owning something, maybe you could have a shared ownership, or maybe you could have different parties owning different rights in the same bit of land. That's quite common in parts of Scandinavia, for example, where you'll have multiple sort of layered ownership of different rights in the same bit of land. So exciting stuff. But I just want to stress this again, because people often don't understand this, that property rights are addressed in human rights legislation, and you cannot just willy-nilly, no government can just willy-nilly go wading in and take land off someone without a very strong public interest justification. Karen mentioned this in the introduction, but I'll say a wee bit more. Part of making sure that those owning land rights also fulfill their responsibilities is to spell out what those responsibilities are. So we've published a whole raft of protocols, tools, and guidance spelling out what responsible looks like. And I think this is really important. And to be fair, the vast majority of landowners have responded very well. And in fact, our protocols were described as the script you should be following at the last AGM of the Scottish Land and Estates, which is encouraging. And people like Karen work really hard with owners, with advisors, with local communities and others to help them get this right. They don't always get it right, but they often do. And a very specific example is the Tenant Farming Commissioner, who's also on board with that commission, Bob McIntosh, that's him on the right, the very elegant hat, who's specifically concerned with the relationships between landowners and tenants. His protocols are actually called codes of practice. They have more statutory underpinning, and there is a thought that maybe that might be extended to other protocols. He also has powers in relation to mediation. He's also been heavily involved in bringing new entrants into the business. So there's a lot of stuff there. I mentioned vacant and derelict land earlier. I'm not going to say an awful lot about this, but it's clear that the land market doesn't always work very well in relation to vacant and derelict sites. It's clear that speculators can sit on vacant and derelict sites in urban Scotland, particularly, for 10, even 20 years on a speculative basis, and in the interim cause huge damage to local communities. Nobody, I think, really should underestimate the social damage and the economic damage of a big vacant derelict site plumb next to where people are trying to live their lives. So we're trying to address that in a number of ways, with quite considerable success actually so far, but it's got some way to go. Housing, I mentioned that to say a little bit more. We've now published advice on this. We're quite clear that under current legislation, it will be very difficult because you depend on the landowner to bring the land forward for housing. And if the landowner chooses not to, or if the landowner chooses to sit on land for a long, long time as a speculator, as a land banker or whatever, that doesn't work. It's not in the public interest. And we've said very clearly that we think there needs to be more robust legislation that allows probably local government the power to say, look, whether or not you, Mr. Landowner, want to bring that forward for housing, we think it needs to be brought forward for housing. So please bring it forward. Tax, highly contentious, potentially hugely significant, not just in, people often see this as only being about raising money. Actually, I think that's the least of it. Much more important, really, actually, is the potential power of tax to influence the actions and decisions of land owners. So we've made recommendations. We've said that we need to investigate further future options for taxing the value that's in land, because there's a huge amount of value in land. And secondly, we need to do a lot more work to design tax to more effectively support land reform objectives. For example, we might be able to use taxation to discourage the concentration of ownership, the accumulation of holdings into one great big concentrated holding. Strategic plan 23 to 26. Well, I don't know what's going to be in that yet, but so I want you to tell us this evening. I'm hoping you will, please. But we will be publishing that in September, assuming the Minister agrees with us, what we decided we're going to do, and we'll be doing a lot of work over the next few months on that. So please tell us what you think the priorities should be for the next 3 years. I just want to say a very little bit about the just transition, because I don't doubt that that will be part of the next 3 years and the next strategic plan. And it's very controversial in South Scotland. So I want to say a bit about it. Land values are soaring where it is possible to plant trees, where it is possible to trap carbon in peat, in particular, elsewhere as well, but in those things. And you're seeing large chunks of agricultural land, often quite good agricultural land, being given over to the sequestration of carbon, primarily through forestry. So how, if that's going to happen, and probably, you know, people probably recognize that we've got to sequester carbon in the short term. In the long term, we've probably got to stop emitting carbon. How are we going to ensure that we continue to have vibrant and sustainable communities in these places? How are we going to avoid the school hemorrhaging its kids and having to close? And what does responsible practice look like? And how else should, you know, how else are we going to ensure that local communities benefit from this transition and we don't end up with a kind of carbon sequestration desert out there? So very, very difficult stuff, very topical. The whole thing's moving extremely fast. If you've got some thoughts, very grateful for them, please. Lastly, just in case you think this is just about Scotland, what is increasingly clear is that the issues we are tackling are just as relevant to Wales and to England and to Ireland. And in fact, our staff have been asked to go and speak at things in England and Wales and Ireland. And I couldn't resist putting this slide up because we published our first strategic plan, which was called Making More of Scotland's Land, in 2018. And in 2022, the House of Lords published a report saying making the most out of England's land. I think that's probably not a coincidence, so it was encouraging to see. But we are having influence, and I think that's good. No, that's good. Scotland is pioneering some of this stuff. It's difficult stuff. We haven't got all the answers, but it's good that we're not doing it in isolation. We, for our part, I should say quickly, we are learning in spades from other parts of Europe. Much of which is ahead of us on a lot of things. Not everything, but a lot of things. You want to know more? We've got this new hub where you can just click onto that, and there's lots and lots and lots of sort of examples of people and organizations who are doing things that are transformative, actually, really important. So it's really helpful to be able to do that. And we have a website which has just got a vast amount of stuff on it now, and a huge amount of information that we've published, because we're just about at the end of our second 3-year plan. So we've been going for nearly 6 years. We've done an awful lot of work. It's all there. So please use that. It's a great resource. If you want to contact us, please use the email. If you want to phone us, please use the phone number. And we're always keen to try and help. I stress we're a small organisation. We don't have all the answers. We don't have everything. We don't have all the resources we'd like, but we'll do our damnedest to help you if we can. So thank you. Now, that's it. I think about enough from me. We can put that back up later, I think, but I'm going to stop the sharing now, if that works. Yes, it does. Good. Right. Now, please. There's lots and lots of stuff in the chat, which I'm going to have a quick scan of. If anyone wants to offer some thoughts verbally or ask a question verbally, that would be wonderful. And to do that, you have to raise your hand. And if you're not sure how to do that, then you click on the more button. Oh, there's someone who knows what they're doing. Well done, Lucy. Thank you. Some people are rather tech savvy. Over to you, Lucy. Let's have your thoughts.
I've done a few of these Zooms. So I was just wondering if, is the Land Commission the only organisation that would be enforcing the Land Reform Act, or how does the sort of powers act in that sort of way? Are there anything else you can call on? And is it for the whole of Scotland? And does it feel like, you said you're a small commission, does it feel like it's enough people that you have to actually make a difference in that way?
So I'm actually going to come to Lauren in a second, but let me just start by saying, so we don't enforce legislation. That's for the courts and for the police. So I should just say that when we don't have, enforcement powers in any sense. But I think, that would be to downplay the significance of the Land Reform Act. Not so much in terms of a big stick to beat people with, but as an empowering tool, particularly as an empowering tool for communities. So, Lauren, do you want to just offer some thoughts? And what effect do you think that it's had?
Okay. Thanks, Lucy, for the question there. Yes, land reform legislation will cover the whole of Scotland. Perhaps the Land Commission will have a role in some aspects of the actual proposals that are going forward in the new bill. And the kind of first draft of that, I would expect to be coming out over the summer. There has been a consultation period already, and some respondents, having looked at some of the responses, have said that maybe we should be involved in some of the regulatory work, but that's not set in stone. It could be a local authority, could be the Scottish Government itself. But obviously we put forward some proposals, as Andrew said in his presentation, talking about a public interest test. We're talking about compulsory management plans for land ownership of scale. And we're also perhaps talking about a legal underpinning of some of the protocols. And our Tenant Farming Commissioner has codes of practice which are enforceable. So we don't really know what the direction of travel would be, but over the summer, a lot will become a bit clearer as the bill moves through the Scottish Parliament and moves towards becoming an act. I think that's all to say, maybe at this stage, Andrew.
Brilliant, Lauren, thanks. Sorry, I'm frantically scrolling through the chat to make sure that we respond to everybody properly. I think what I'm going to ask Karen to do, so Karen, there's quite a lot of questions in there about land use decision making, about dairy, about biodiversity, about the nature crisis, and there's quite a lot of the whole question of how do we make sure we can abdicate land use decision making to people who own land, just say like you do it, but that's the power challenge. Or we can have more collective ways and more participative ways of trying to make decisions about land use. Do you want to just offer some thought on that, particularly around things like community empowerment and the protocol on community engagement, that sort of stuff? Karen, please.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Yes, I was noticing that in the chat, and a lot of the work of the Good Practice team is around, in a way, kind of trying to help balance up these discussions around competing needs from land. And the Commission has produced a set of protocols that accompany the Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement, and those protocols deal with issues like community engagement, or what's reasonable to expect from transparency, also good stewardship, and a recent protocol reflects the kind of changing environment around natural capital. But in a way, the good stewardship protocol is quite core when you come to that issue of these different competing needs, like economic needs, environmental needs, social needs from land. And as Andrew sort of was alluding to, the balance comes from various layers of action on that. There's some onus on landowners and land managers to take proportionate and reasonable action to engage people where there's going to be significant or moderate impact. I noticed one of the chat comments was about concern around onerous burdens on land managers that there might be in the future. And a lot of my work with land managers is often reassuring them that that at the core of this is what's reasonable and proportionate. And the core of the Scottish Government's guidance on this is about identifying the level of impact by different land use decisions, and what's seen as significantly impactful and that requires the highest level of community engagement is significant. It's land use decisions that permanently affect the viability of communities, and that's the sort of language that's used around significant decision making. Another point I wanted to raise was around, yes, the wider layers of planning and land use decision making, and many of you will be aware of the current pilots around regional land use partnerships, of which there's a pilot in the south of Scotland, and there are 4 other pilots around the country, and that is an experiment in adding a layer of democracy where people's voices can be heard, which are regionally appropriate to the different land use needs in that area. So of course there's a lot of issues around a one-size-fits-all approach can't work for a whole country. It's important that those regional voices are heard so that land use decision making correctly addresses the needs and priorities of each area.
Karen, thanks very much. Now, Andrew McCormick has, I think, neatly encapsulated a concern that bothers a lot of people, which is this is all good, but as you increasingly regulate, you put a burden on people who are actually just busy trying to feed the nation. And that is a really important issue. I wondered if you wanted to actually speak to that, Andrew. If you can hear me, please do.
Yeah, I can hear you fine, Andrew. So hello. Can you pick me up okay?
I can hear you fine, and I should say that Andrew is one of the heroes who keeps us all from being hungry. So over to you, Andrew.
I think, I mean, even to what was just Karen was raising there, where's the differentiation between planning law and what we're going to be getting community empowerment? Because there's challenges coming forward there as well. And I'm looking at this as a landowner, a tenant farmer, and I'm trying to provide food, and equally I want to save the environment. I've got all these challenges in my head, and I'm not fully aware of what future agricultural policy is, again, for our industry, affecting both farmers and crofters. And yet I'm seeing the potential of more and more legislation coming on us, challenging us to try and make the best use of our land, which we all want to do, but not really knowing what direction we're moving in. So it's adding stress, but it's the burden. What's going to be coming at us as an additional cost without us being able to get any kind of return on it, to be able to then supply to the market, which is, I would say, most farmers and crofters' objective, is to supply food to feed the nation. So I'll stop at that, Andrew. No doubt I'll come back in later on. I'm sitting here, I'm really passionate about this Scottish Land Commission and its work. I think there's a lot of good work can be done with it, but equally I don't want to see it hamstringing the industry.
Andrew, thank you. And I was really pleased to see you contributing, because it is really important that we recognise the pragmatic realities of that regulation is not cost-free. So it may produce benefits, and in fact it often does. Regulation does produce benefits. That's what it's done for. But someone's got to pay the cost of it. So thank you, Andrew. Link to that, I'm sorry, I just didn't catch the name, but there was someone else in the chat anxious about food security, and there were 1 or 2 themes about, are we going to produce food, or are we going to produce trees, or are we going to produce carbon? And there's clearly, you can do one or the other. So if you decide to stop producing food and produce trees to trap carbon, there's that, how are you going to, where's the food going to come from? And if you're offshoring that food production, are you offshoring your carbon emissions? There's some quite difficult issues in there. I don't know if anyone wants to speak to that, but I saw something in the chat. Please use the chat, the hands-free, sorry, the raise hands button, if you can find it. There's somebody, Mary, go for it.
Yeah, I'm here, with Margaret Poole, who was the former chair of the Langham Initiative. And I think she just nipped home for a minute, but just next door. But she was is particularly concerned, I think, and as am I really, about the number of sort of viable small farms around this area that have been sold and are now going under forestry. And so we're losing, you know, food production to forestry here in this area. So I think she's really concerned about that. So it's us that we're raising that issue here. Because over, you know, certainly the last 5 years, that's what's happened. And one of the company that bought a significant amount of land from Buccleuch they're just about to consult on the proposals for planting most of this land, as I say, which was formerly small farms in this area. So it was us.
So could you say a wee bit more, Mary, about, I think it's oxygen, I forgot my name, but I think it'd be helpful for people to hear a wee bit more about that.
Yeah.
In some ways it exemplifies some of the challenges we're dealing with.
Yeah.
We want on the one hand, sorry,
Yeah.
over to you.
Sorry, it's the land mostly that's been bought by James Jones around Langham and to the south of Langham in the Canonby area. So it's that land in particular that you know, that's where the concern is. It's not the land that you probably were mentioned there that has just been sold to Oxygen Conservation, but it's the land that was sold a few years ago to James Jones.
Yeah. There was a mixture of dairy farms and mixed farms, sheep and cattle. There was very little arable involved in it, but it's the fact that it's gone to monoculture rather than, you know, producing food for local people.
Yeah,
that really concerns me, that we're putting ourselves into a very vulnerable situation. Sorry.
Yeah, so thank you, and I remember that well, actually, and it was quite controversial, and I was a bit controversial about it at the time, but yeah, it is a very difficult one, because we can all agree probably that it would be a good thing to sequester more carbon. But we can also possibly agree that you know, there were quite a few tenant farmers involved in that. They presumably had kids in school. They bought stuff at the shop. They supported the local nurse. So there are, you know, this is not a straightforward matter. Now, there were a number of people who mentioned biodiversity, not directly, but implied they were interested in the whole business of buying land for biodiversity credits, concerned about the nature crisis, and oxygen conservation has just been mentioned, big player in your part of the country. And of course, the Langham Initiative, which is community-led, is also hugely important in all of that. Let's explore some of that. John's got his hand up. John Wheeler.
Right. Hello. Yeah, I'm John Wheeler. I'm chair of Nith Life, a new organisation that is bringing people together across as wide a range as possible to do as much as we can for the health and life of the Nith Valley. It's farming, it's peatlands, it's just about everything you can think of, particularly, you know, the river, the watershed, everything where the rain falls. You know, we're interested in the well-being of that. And I just want to say I can't do chat. The last time I tried chat on the Zoom, I got lost and never found my way back. And I suppose I just wanted to say something I heard on the radio a while ago was about the flow country. And it was said on the BBC, rightly or wrongly, that the peat in the flow country sequesters more carbon than all the woodlands in the country. And so I'm really interested, and so are quite a few members of our group, in being absolutely sure that when we plant trees, that the sequestering ability of the trees is not going to be less than what is already held in the carbon, in the peat. And I think SEPA has a firm view on this and will make the right decisions in the right places, but I'm not entirely sure, and I fear that SEPA is dreadfully underfunded, and it's very difficult for them to do everything that needs to be done. Yeah.
John, you're right, and we when we published our advice recently, actually, on the whole business of carbon sequestration and natural capital investment, we made it very clear that it is hugely important that these markets are pretty tightly regulated. If we allow a sort of Wild West to happen, then people will be sold a dummy, frankly. You can plant a lot of trees and claim to be sequestering carbon, while in the process of draining the peat to plant the trees, you've released a heap of carbon. So it's quite clear that this must be very tightly regulated, or it'll be a nonsense. I don't know, Karen, do you want to say a wee bit about that, or I mean, if you don't, just say no.
I suppose in relation to the sort of tackling the climate emergency side of things, in all conversations around carbon sequestration as part of that, it always comes back to tackle the climate emergency, we need to reduce emissions at source as the primary goal. So we do try to sort of frame it within that, but yeah, it's a tricky challenge to find a sensible route through that conversation, so that you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You have to deal with a reality that's happening on the land just now, but in as good a way as possible. So there is the protocol on responsible natural capital and carbon management, which followed the Scottish Government's interim principles on how did they word it? Basically on natural capital and carbon management as well. So there's that kind of guidance, but there is a question remaining about the sort of regulation of those industries.
Karen, thanks. I mean, this is fast moving. We are very, very clear that this does need to be properly thought through and properly regulated. And I think nobody should be blind to the fact that there are real risks here. Nick, let's hear from Nick Chisholm, because he's got his hand up. Nick.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, it's really when you start talking about there the issues around carbon sequestration and mixing it in with biodiversity, then mix it in with planting, etc. And the way we've done things in the past decade or so has led to quite a lot of greenwashing around this, where vast tracts of land are being purchased to plant often single species of trees that have attracted grants from the taxpayer and tax benefits as well for the landowners, and they're not really doing anything towards helping in the climate crisis. They're probably exacerbating it in the short term with the practices that they're using. And you're absolutely right when you say that the real thing we need to do is stop at source. But we're quite a small nation, and our impact on CO2 emissions is quite low. We should be best practice. We should try and be better than everyone else. We know that many other nations won't be. And we don't talk enough about how we are going to start adapting our land to and our landscapes to the climate we may be experiencing in 20, 30, 40, 50 years' time. A climate which we don't know what it will be, but the predictions from United Nations are not particularly cheerful. We're not meeting any of the targets that we set ourselves, and it's getting gloomier and gloomier. We will not be able to grow the same crops we grow at the moment. We're already talking with some of our important commercial timber crops that perhaps the east coast of Scotland will not be a suitable place for Sitka spruce in the future. I kind of wish that was the case in Galloway, to be honest with you, but that's another story. But we are kind of talking around subjects where I still feel we've not taken any of the opportunities we've had to change the way in which we fund land ownership. Land ownership has been funded by the taxpayer pretty much since the war, heavily, in terms of we want the land to produce food for this or timber for that, etc. And it's always been on an extractive policy where we're extracting as much as we can from the land. If we want land ownership to be successful, whomever owns it, we must make sure we fund land ownership which promotes land health, promotes soil health. We can plant as many trees as we want. If we destroy the soil under the trees before we plant them, we're pretty screwed. So there's a huge amount of things we want to change the narrative from being an extractive land ownership to proactive and sustainable land ownership, ideally more community owned. But regardless of who owns it, if it's not profitable to have bad management won't happen. At the moment, it is profitable to have bad management on your land. Sorry.
Nick, yeah, no, that's really helpful, Nick. And Roland, I'm delighted to see you put your hands up because I saw you were in the chat and I was going to ask you to speak. So over to you.
Oh, well, thank you very much. No, it's an enormous issue, this one, around really what are the causes of the dilemmas that we're talking about now. So I want to just try and come in with a few thoughts that I hope will be helpful here from the perspective of this project I'm involved with, the Royal Meteorological Society, on climate education. But in working on this and thinking about what people are saying to me, constantly I'm having to come back to the fact that the international legislation around human rights, all these sorts of issues, the way the economic system is structured internationally, the infrastructure of finance globally and so forth, are fundamentally incompatible with achieving what has to be done, which is not just to get, hopefully, no higher than 1.5 degrees Celsius rise in average global temperatures, but actually to do what people are talking the language of climate positive or net positive or real zero and so forth are talking, which is somewhere we really have a good chance of not only peaking, but also ultimately going on a trajectory of reducing down to the present or even lower levels. Because in our profession, meteorologically, we are so aware of the consequences already globally at 1.1, 1.2 degrees Celsius rise in temperature that are causing all these problems of people simply in other parts of the world not being able to see a sustainable future. Water tables dropping, a vicious circle with higher evapotranspiration. Even if you can spend more and more on irrigation boreholes, you are not going to crack the problem. You just are part of a vicious circle with enormous costs. And that's why our profession, I'm homing in somewhat now on this concept that really the Western world hasn't been thinking about, or pushing into the long grass of loss and damage. Now, the way in which loss and damage is viewed internationally is really crucial to how we come about thinking of the way in which we view and legislate for what we understand as natural capital. Now, one of our local community council chairs, Richard Middleton in Crossmichael, has come up with a brilliant paper called Against Natural Capital, which I'd be happy to share with anybody. I know he is, that raises pretty profound questions around this. So there's a lot of informing ourselves of what we need to do conceptually and working out an ethics that is compatible with the globe having a reasonably good chance of not going too far further down a disastrous course it's been on for progressively, almost exponentially over the last 3 centuries, that's produced the climate and nature crises at the present time. So it's a big philosophical question I'm raising in the context of what I so much agree with John and the other speakers just now, we need to tackle at the local level here. And of course, I must highlight the importance of lands being able to be available to, it's almost, if we're getting away from the concept of ownership, because it's been so much in the context of an inappropriately structured economic power system of the past, we've got to find a trajectory and train new generations in looking at our relationship with the land as all of us as temporary tenants on it, rather than as owners in an absolute binary sense. I'm an owner, you therefore aren't an owner of this land. So we've got to think about that more seriously. And I'd love to see this, Andrew, embodied into the legislation in the future. I know it would be very groundbreaking. I know it's part of what is frightening the Westminster government, and thus the pressure on the Scottish government not to talk to foreign governments in the context of loss and damage and the well-being economic group of nations. So I have talked to quite some length there, but it's very good of you, Andrew, to let me come in on this, as it is a very complicated issue, but I hope putting it that way has just helped trigger some thoughts for others, and I'll very much look forward to hearing their thoughts on this.
Roland, thanks very much. And, and all of this is integrated. Some people ask me, what on earth is a land reform body getting involved in climate change at all? But these things are all integrated. Mary, I'm hoping you're going to bring this back in a way to so what about local communities and local people? Because if you're not, then I am. But over to you. You're muted, sorry.
Yeah, well, I think we just wanted to say something about our new neighbours, Oxygen Conservation. I don't know if there's anyone here from that company tonight, but we recently met them over near Newcastleton because they've bought the land adjacent to our Tarras Valley Nature Reserve now. And I think our first impression, and we've only had a small impression really of this organisation, of this company, is that they perhaps were not very aware of the kind of policy contexts in Scotland, and thinking about their land, the deep peat that they have on their land, and what they would be able to do and what they might not be able to do. I suppose it's always been a concern in Scotland that anyone could come in if they had the money to buy land in Scotland, big vast estates, and we've seen there are a lot of landowners who come from other countries and buy land. But I think that was just something we wonder about. Is there any way of engaging with new landowners like Oxygen Conservation, just to kind of appraise them of the kind of guidance that you have for working with communities or for consulting people and investigating what they can do and can't do? So I think maybe Margaret has something else, I don't know.
It is an impression and no more than that they have bought land in a number of places, and I don't think they fully appreciate that we have a different legal system here, and we have an independent, to a point, government that's trying to, through the likes of yourself, oversee what's happening with land in the future in Scotland.
Well, look, thank you. Let's not speculate about what Oxygen may or may not think. We absolutely stand ready to help, and Karen works really hard to make sure that new owners of land in Scotland know that we're there. So that's there for Oxygen and everybody else. But let's just explore the general point, which is, I think, and I'll maybe come to you, Lorne, for sorry, I've sort of put the spotlight on you suddenly, but I think there is a really important linkage between what we've just been talking about and the concentration of Scotland's pattern of land ownership, the way in which power is therefore concentrated and perhaps not modulated, mitigated as much as in some other countries, and therefore the health of local communities, the vibrancy of local communities, the risk of as I say, not having enough kids in the school, not having enough customers in the local shop. I could draw parallels, oddly enough, with decisions to bring sheep into Scotland, some time ago. Lorne, do you want to explore some of that? The link between power, concentration, communities. Over to you.
Yeah, well, thanks, Andrew. And thanks for the points there from Mary and Margaret. Don't know the specifics about Oxygen Conservation, but just mentioning and highlighting that obviously our good practice team can offer some guidance about the additional responsibilities that come with land ownership in Scotland, and the need to positively engage with communities and have a level of openness and transparency in dealings. So I think the actual threshold in Scotland for land ownership and the expectations around that are higher than perhaps other parts of the United Kingdom. And indeed, with the new land reform bill, which is very much focused on concentrated land ownership, any landowner, and there are new players on the scene in terms of acquiring land in Scotland and have an appetite for purchasing more land, that there will be additional expectations coming on the back of the new Land Reform Act in terms of a public interest test. If proposals at the moment are, if acquisition is over 3,000 hectares, compulsory land management plans, and indeed what we talked about earlier there, protocols having a legal underpinning, so there will be greater expectations. And it is useful to get in early with new landowners to kind of talk about some of that. So and obviously we go around the country. Indeed, our next board meeting is in Dumfries and Galloway. I think we're more focused around Kirkcudbright and more towards the Galloway area, but this is what is so important in our virtual public meetings. And I know I've been at a couple of meetings in Langham and in Dumfries and various other places, and picking up a lot of the feedback on some of these new land ownership players. So it is interesting, and please, take the opportunity to ask you to get in touch if there are any issues that are causing any concern, or where you would like to see more community engagement. Contact us, and I know that the contact details will be put up in the chat boxes there. Thanks, Andrew.
No, thank you. I think I must be becoming telepathic, because Andrew McCormack has just put his hand up and I was about to ask him to put his hand up. So that's great. Andrew, you put something in there about the community wealth building consultation, and that is really very important as well. Over to you.
Well, I wasn't actually going to dwell on that, but I was wanting people to get into that and read what the community wealth building was about, because I have a fear that, and again, it's back to this big blocks of land being owned by individuals or corporations. They're going to, what you were saying, we're going to lose the schools, we're going to lose the local shops, we're going to lose all of that. And that to me is a big fear that I've got. But again, and it's back to what Lauren was saying, it's an add-on to it, but where is and I'm maybe being naive here, is the scale of ownership really the biggest priority here? Is it not the use of the land that we should be trying to focus on? And it's how do we get the best use of that land for the communities and for the people that's living in these areas? Because there's a lot, and Lauren was going significantly hard in scale ownership, and I understand that. But again, it's how it's used. If you have a landowner that's actually renting out land or tenanting land and allowing people to get onto it, you're going to get maybe a better use of that land. So it's actually the policy and how we use that land rather than specifically aiming at the ownership of it. I don't know if I'm being naive or that, but have you got evidence, data that's actually shown how this is throwing the land use out of scale because of the scale of the ownership? Because I'm seeing a lot of land, Dumfries and Galloway is particularly well endowed with forestry, and I don't see an awful lot of good coming out of that, apart from lorries and lorries running with trees here, there and everywhere.
So we explored this. Andrew, thank you. I'm going to say a wee bit now, if I may. So we explored this issue of, does it matter if we have lots of big landowners or a few big landowners? And what our research showed was that it mattered. It doesn't matter in the sense that there would be some parts of the country, for example, the far northwest, where you could actually own a big-ish area of land and you wouldn't be in any significant monopoly position. But there are many parts of the country where, if you are a very big landowner, then you are in effect a local monopoly. And because with ownership comes the power to determine land use, you put all your eggs in one basket. So it is about land use, Andrew. I agree. I think the concern that we've expressed is that if you allow the power to determine how land is used to sit in very few hands, you take quite a significant risk. You take the risk, of course, you take the risk that you'll get the odd landowner who is actually genuinely maligned, but that's very rare. What the risk is actually that not so much that you'll have malign owners, because they won't be that common, but that you'll have simply suboptimal or inept owners, and that land use decision making will not be necessary, because that power is highly concentrated. You as I say, you put your eggs in one basket. And of course, a lot of Scotland's landowners have not got into that position through merit, through building a business and all the rest of it. They've inherited it, and they may or may not have the ability to do that job well. So that has to be the concern. One way of dealing with it undoubtedly is to regulate, and we do that, and we've produced advice on regulation. We've talked about that this evening. Another way to deal with it is to, as in any other part of the economy, is not to allow monopolies to develop to any significant extent, but to actually, in most other parts of the economy, you wouldn't allow one person to own all the streets or all the shops on a high street. You wouldn't allow one person to own all the chemists in Scotland, etc., etc. So that was the line of thinking, rather than specifically saying, look, big is bad per se. Now, I would quite like to pick up one or two people flagging an interest in croftling and smallholding. So I'd like to pick that up if anyone wants to put a hand up and say something about that. I saw something in the chat. I think I would also like at some point, Lauren, to come back to the issue of community benefit from investment in natural capital. We're doing work on that at the moment, so I don't want to preempt that too much, but it's a really important issue. Anyone want to contribute something? Lots of stuff flying out in the chat. No one wanting to say anything. Lauren, in that case, oh, here's Lucy coming back in. Lucy, go for it, please. Thank you.
Sorry, me again. So I was just that Lucy popped up I wasn't going to say anything because I don't have a lot of experience in and I'm very new in this area. But I do have a number of friends that have been trying to get access to small areas of land to develop organic fruit and veg farming. And it feels like on the scale of agriculture that you're talking, it feels very small, but I know that it's a very real problem for that has only been exacerbated since COVID, because all of the small farms, any land that's going up for sale has gone up price so much, and everybody, all of the people that I know that are wanting to get access to small portions of land are priced out immediately. And it does have a big impact. So our local village, the next village along, there is a reasonably small bit of land that was split up into small parcels, and that has regenerated the local community shop, and it's had a big impact on the local area and the school as well. So although it's a small region, it's a very small bit of land, but it's had such a big impact. And these small little patches of land that are so hard to get hold of right now feels like really important. So I just wanted to highlight that, really.
You're muted, Andrew. I was just going to...
Karen, I've got it. Thank you. Sorry, okay. Karen, do you want to come in?
Yeah.
First of all, thank you for rescuing me.
Thank you, Lucy, and Lucy in the chat for raising that issue of access to land at smaller scales. One of the key principles of the Land Rights and Responsibility Statement is around diversification of ownership and tenure and use, and that is increasingly well, it's increasingly central to our work. We've recently employed a project officer who is focusing on trying to create new opportunities for diversification of ownership, tenure and use. And that means creating opportunities for communities and individuals to get access to land in the context of a land market, which is creating less and less accessibility to land. So we also have current research that's just about to be published around the changes in the land market, which is the second. We're doing this research annually, and that's going to be published next month, in the next couple of weeks, I think, or in May. We also try to influence policy which affects the inflation in the land market, to give advice around ways of helping increase opportunity for access to land, because we see how the insane situation really of how difficult it is for a person to achieve a dream of access to a small bit of land to, for example, have a local food project or run a local business, or on the big, on the sort of small to medium scale in agriculture as well, for new entrants and farmers to get access to land. And coming back to that issue that was raised about how do we talk to new large-scale owners who may not be experienced with the policy context or in this country. We're doing a lot of work around working with landowners on a programme called Leadership in Good Practice, we're sort of training. We're listening to what they're saying about their sector, and we're training on what is proportionate and reasonable community engagement and transparency. We also have our casework, which means that people contact us and let us know when they're experiencing problems or having issues that they want to resolve in relation to land ownership in their area. Or it can be landowners who contact us and want to have a bit of support in working through an issue that they're finding challenging. And we're developing a self-evaluation process. And we're doing that with a couple of large, we've been piloting it with different sort of cohorts of landowners. And at the moment, we're working with a couple of landowners that kind of fall into that category that you're describing, where they may be investors or foreign landowners who are not familiar with the situation in this country. The situation with those ones is that they actually are wanting to try to do it right. So they've approached us to engage in a sort of self-evaluation process, and we hope that we'll learn from that as well in making it a practicable approach.
Karen, thanks. So there's the business of how do we maintain and create small farms, tenanted or share farmed or whatever. There's the business of how do we create small holdings which may not be economically viable as agricultural units, but which anchor people into communities and create the basis for something different. And associated with that, I'm going to turn to Lorne, is the whole business of community ownership, because crofting, I'm going to say very briefly about crofting. Crofting was kind of invented in a way in 1886 as a counterbalance to the power of big landowners. It only applies in the crofting counties at the moment, which is the north and west, although there is talk of extending it to other parts of Scotland. But what we're seeing in the crofting counties is that some community landowners are creating new crops, are deliberately, as part of their plan for the land they bought, is actually to create small holdings by another name. Lorne, where do you see the potential for community ownership in going forward, particularly in the south? What sort of opportunities do you think people might want to think about?
Thanks, Andrew. There's certainly been a growing interest in the south of Scotland, particularly in Dumfries and Galloway, from community ownership of land and assets. we talked about earlier there, Taras Valley obviously has hit the headlines, and a lot of interesting developments there. But in addition to that, you've got like the mid-steeple quarter in Dumfries that is acquiring parts of the high street to look at regeneration, which is very much community-led. And indeed, I think I saw a tweet yesterday that was looking at potential interest in the first new houses back in the town centre of Dumfries. But in addition to that, there are community initiatives, Newton Stewart, Carshfearn, Lockerbie Old School, Annan Harbour Group, Wigton and Bladnoch Community Initiative. There's a lot going on in Dumfries and Galloway. Perhaps it might not take the same direction as some of the community landowners in the Western Isles and in the Highlands and Islands, but that is absolutely the best way forward for Dumfries and Galloway, and hopefully be able to establish opportunities for maybe acquisition, not looking at whole estates, but looking at land around villages, around towns, whether that is for housing development, whether it's for community facilities, whether it's for business growth and setting up business units. These are all important, as was said earlier by many of the speakers, and I can see also in the fantastic chat boxes there, a lot of the issues are rooting people in communities and young people in communities in particular. And I think the opportunities that come on the back of community ownership and the wider benefits as a result of that can help to do that. And indeed, opportunities for small holdings. And indeed, if crofting moves out of the traditional crofting counties and look at potential throughout the whole of Scotland, there are additional opportunities there. So I think that's all I'll say at this stage, Andrew.
Lauren, thanks very much. I'll just respond to Christine in the chat. So I think in the context that we're using the term small holding, we just means a small bit of land. I don't think it's classed. There is small holdings legislation, but it's that's something slightly different. And the point that Karen's raised about woodland crofts is very important. There's actually some really interesting stuff happening around new woodland croft creation in the crofting counties. So I mean, I don't want to go on about it at this meeting, but there's no question in my mind, and it may not even be in my lifetime, but I do think that crofting tenure in some form, it may well be highly modified, will have an important role to play in the future of Scotland, because it enables people to be anchored into communities. It's not about creating viable agricultural units. It's about giving people roots, I suppose, is not a bad way of looking at it. Now, got about 10 minutes left, and I promised, and I will keep my promise, to let you go at 8:30, so you can get a quick walk. Anyone want anything else that they want to talk? Yep, so thank you, Roland. The hatting, yes, my granny was a hatter, absolutely. And hats, thank you, Marek. I mean, there's something special about hats, actually. I would love to see hatting, because of the issues of not having secure tenure. It came, well, in the case of my granny's hut, it was burnt to the ground by the landowner. I'll not go on about that, but it came to a sad end in many cases. But hatting as an idea still has its day. John Wheeler, let's hear from John.
Just quickly, I really appreciate, Andrew, I really appreciate your viewing certain matters as a monopoly issue. I rather wish newspapers, UK-wide and retail, had stronger restraints on from a monopoly perspective, and to view the land thing as coming under monopoly legislation would be great. Yeah. I think I wanted to say something else, but I'll come back in if I remember it.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I think it is an important point, because people rightly ask, why does it matter if someone has a lot of land? And people say, as somebody said earlier this evening, it's not about what people own; it's about what they do with it, and that's a perfectly legitimate point of view. But the monopoly point is not. It is in a sense drawing the connection between those two things, because particularly in this country, with ownership goes an awful lot of power. I mean, in other parts of Europe, actually, the ownership of land is much more highly regulated, so there's not so much power involved. But particularly because we have a very unregulated land market in Scotland and in the UK. And because it's highly unregulated, it therefore puts you in a position of a lot of power. And that's why this matters. Lord, I would like to come back to the question of community benefit from natural capital briefly. Now, we haven't published on this. We are going to publish on it pretty soon, probably by the end of May, I'm hoping. Nikki can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's the plan. So obviously we can't sort of say, well, here's our advice, because we haven't quite sorted that yet. But the whole issue of, and I don't want to draw too much of a parallel, but most wind farms in Scotland make a deliberate cash contribution to local community benefit. And there's been a long discussion, a very open discussion, about whether other kinds of carbon sequestration, natural capital, and all the rest of it, should they do something similar? And we published some initial thoughts, and we published a consultation paper which is closed. But do you want to just offer some thoughts sort of off the top of your head or whatever, Lauren, without recognizing that the advice is not published yet?
Well, thank you, Andrew. This is a kind of fast moving item at the moment. Indeed, there's a meeting I'm attending tomorrow that's talking about natural capital and community benefit. And there are a lot of aspects to it, and there are a lot of players other than just the Land Commission, Nature Scot and others involved that are looking at some research and all this. And has been highlighted, that there are examples from the renewable energy industry, the community benefit of £5,000 per megawatt installed as kind of standard in terms of onshore wind turbines. But there maybe isn't a direct correlation between that and what might come with the actual natural capital market, because it's going to be a slightly different market. But I think looking at the chat box earlier, I think there was a comment there I saw picked up from Morag Patterson that was talking about where there are major land use changes as a result of natural capital and changes in use. Very much part of the just transition to net zero is that there needs to a look towards wider community benefits, and I think it was highlighted. Could they look, if a purchaser wants to turn towards a woodland planting, that they maybe look at some of the land that could be transferred to a local community for housing or for some other development like community need. And I think we're looking at wider benefits there, as well as the sort of direct monetary benefits. And I think you can probably pick up, and I know the linkages have been put in the chat box to some of our work so far on responsible natural capital and a good practice guide, which kind of gives indications of what we as the Scottish Land Commission would expect as best practice for landowners in engaging with communities about benefits, also about maybe looking at innovative governance structures which bring local community representatives on board in terms of the management of the land and inputting their ideas towards the management of the land. So there are a lot of issues there. As Andrew said, we're still at early days, but we will be coming out with more concrete proposals in that regard. So I just maybe leave it at that because I'm conscious of time. Andrew, back to you.
Lauren, thanks very much indeed. Yeah, we are running out of time. I'm sorry, because this is there's so much in here, and it's the nature of the Land Commission's work is that it touches so many things, and some of these things are hugely important. We're talking about the future viability of many rural communities. If we get this wrong, this could be another Highland clearance, well, Scottish clearances, and of course there were clearances in the Lowlands as much as in the Highlands. If we get it right, actually we could really make a big difference to rural Scotland. This could bring a lot of money into rural Scotland, because there's no question there's money chasing land at the moment. Land prices are rocketing. So the money's there. We need to make sure it benefits. Andrew, it looks like you might get the last word. Go for it, Andrew McCormick.
It's going back to natural capital. I'm sitting in shadows now. It doesn't matter there. I've a real fear that city money is going to come in, buy up this land at a racing high values, and they're going to take the benefits in any local community value out and use it elsewhere. And then we're going to see, I'm going to go back to food, but it could apply to anything. I'm going to see then all of the benefits is actually being exported abroad, because we're going to have to bring in product to fill in the gap that land has been taken away from. And somebody's earning money out of natural capital, they're earning money out of all sorts of things, greenwashing, whatever it is for their businesses that allows them to not do what they should for the environment. How can you legislate to prevent that from happening? I would like to see it sort of ring fenced. Scotland produces this natural benefit, it should stay within Scotland some way. I don't know, that's probably one of your challenges for your next 3-year plan. But it's a real fear, and a lot of people within the industry have got a real fear of this.
Andrew, I couldn't agree more. And it absolutely, I will be astonished. I should say that my contract ends at the end of this year. I won't be able to stay on after that, but I have no doubt that that is going to be central to the next 3 years' work. It's already actually central to our work, Andrew. You've articulated better than I have the threat, the problem, the challenge. The positive is that there is an awful lot of money pouring into Scotland, chasing these benefits from our land. It is therefore, if you put those two things together, we have a choice. We can allow this unregulated market to continue, in which speculative money from outside comes in to our land, extracts benefit much as extractive industries do anywhere else in the world, and goes away again. And that's one scenario. The other scenario actually is that all this money comes in, and that a great deal of the consequence, the revenue that flows from that investment, stays and benefits local people, not just in cash terms, but in terms of employment, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of a whole heap of other things. And we absolutely must make that second one work. It will not be a just transition, to quote to quote the phrase, if we don't achieve that. So that's the big challenge for us, Andrew, and thank you for articulating it better than I have. I'm very grateful. Okay, 2 minutes left, so I will wrap up. Firstly, thank you everybody for participating so vigorously and so thoughtfully and so intelligently. That's very much appreciated. Jess has put up a wee downloadable thing with all the links. That's really helpful, Jess. Thanks. That means that you don't actually have to sit and watch the video of all this. You can just download the links. So thank you. If it's in the chat, it's a Word thing. Just click and it'll download. So that's hugely helpful. I put up before, but you'll find it on our website anyway, a phone number and an email address. And the reason I did that is that I'm a great believer. I think public meetings are a great way of public servants engaging with the people who pay their wages and being held to account. I think that's hugely important. I've always done it in my career. But I've also found that a lot of people want to engage with you outside the formal bit of the meeting, and you can't do that. In a village hall, you just get nobbled behind the door after the meeting. You can't do that online. So please, if you want to talk to me privately, email, Google Land Commission, get that email address, email and ask, and I will phone you. I'll give you that undertaking. I will phone you, and you can hold me to account. Go for it. I think it's a really important thing to offer. Over the next few months, we'll be working on the strategic plan. There will be events. Please watch the website. We have to have it ready by September, and with government and with Parliament. But it is going to be important, and it is going to be, I think, primarily about the just transition. I think, the issues that Andrew McCormick just articulated so well are of colossal importance, not just to us, but to our children and our grandchildren. We must get this right. So getting the strategic plan's vital. this evening's conversation will feed into that. Please continue to feed into that. Otherwise, please now go and put your feet up and a safe journey to your kitchen or your booze cabinet or wherever you have to. And thank you all very, very much indeed. That's been a most worthwhile evening. Much appreciated. Good night.
Thank you very much.